Hey guys, welcome to our presentation. You've got me, Mary Lauren Teague, and Amy Smith. I'm going to introduce Amy in just a second, but the topic we're going to be speaking about is Same Song, Different Verse, Evolution of the Entertainment and Music Industry in the COVID Era. We all know that COVID-19 impacted all areas of the entertainment and music industry. We've all had so many events affected by COVID-19. So a lot of tours have been suspended, canceled during 2020, 2021, and even early 2022. We've lost countless music venues, especially some of the older iconic ones. We've seen them close their doors in the middle of COVID, which has been really unfortunate. In addition, we've seen lost revenue for sponsorships, merchandise, ticketing, restaurants, hotels. The list goes on and on. We've just seen so many different facets of the music business be negatively impacted, and it's caused us as an industry to have to rise to the occasion and come up with creative solutions to attack this COVID-19 virus and the economic issues that it's caused. There hasn't been a one-size-fits-all response to the challenges faced. The responses have been very customized based on what's going to work for a particular artist or what's going to work for a particular segment of the industry. There are 4 different themes, though, that have emerged during the pandemic and we believe are going to have lasting effects. So those 4 themes are what we're going to talk about today. The first being contract language. The second is insurance policy terms. The third is live streaming, and the fourth is the social media platforms, and specifically new social media platforms that have emerged during the pandemic and afterwards. So I'm going to turn it over now to Amy Smith to talk about contract language and insurance policy terms, and then I'll wrap it up for us.
Thanks, Mary Lauren. So as it relates to contract law, we always start with that idea of the relationships between the parties who are able to contract with one another. And what's the nice thing about that under the law is that the parties are able to customize the terms of their own relationship. In that, they get to allocate the risk between the parties. We've always operated under that. The goal of all of our court systems across the country, whether the state or federal system, the goal of each of the court systems is to accomplish the parties' intentions. The problem that occurred when COVID arose is that we had not seen this issue in our lifetime before. And so we were all faced with having to look at our contract terms to see if we had properly predicted what had happened as it relates to the provisions inside our contracts. Mainly, we were focused on unforeseen circumstances and how were those issues dealt with in the actual contract. And so as we looked at that, one of the first things that lawyers question is, what did our force majeure clause look like in each of our individualized contracts? They vary, but let me first define what force majeure is. It's an event or effect that can neither be anticipated or controlled. In the old days, prior to COVID, we looked at that from either acts of nature, which might be floods, hurricanes, weather kinds of events. We also saw that as acts of people, strikes, union issues that might occur additional to strikes. And so we usually had an eye to what kinds of activities could occur under that type of provision. We usually found those terms located in the actual boilerplate sections of our contracts, usually at the very end, because we didn't have to rely on them very often. What we do know is that the law has been established as it relates to force majeure. And so there are 4 claims or 4 elements that you would have to prove if you were taking these issues to court. Those remained. I won't go through those. Those are listed there on the PowerPoint. What's important to recognize is that the issue or the issue that has arisen must be impossible. It can't just be that it's burdensome to carry through with the terms of your contract. Can't just be that it's very expensive. It needs to be that it becomes impossible under the contract due to what has occurred. We sometimes refer to force majeure as acts of God. That's another way we often talk about it. So what we knew before COVID is the same that we know after COVID, and that is the bottom line is you got to review the facts of each case. What we recognize now is that all of our facts have continued to be different from one another, and there's not one catch-all. There's not one type of resolution that we have seen that the courts have taken as it relates to reviewing these kinds of terms. What we can learn from COVID, though, is that moving forward, what we should do inside our contract terms would be some of the things that I've listed next. First, select a resolution process that's going to work. If you are agreeable to going to litigation when that issue arises, then build that into your contract, as we have often done. And that's what we've seen in COVID, where we've had to go into the court system, whether that's the state or the federal court system, and test what the terms of our contracts have been. And did that force majeure term, actually deal with the terms or the issues that have arisen in COVID. The other option that many of us are looking at, more so outside of COVID, but we also in the last 20 years have really turned this direction as well, and that is ADR, looking at and utilizing alternative disputes to resolution. So we're talking about negotiation, mediation, and even arbitration. And sometimes that can lower the parties' expectations, which sometimes can be good in an adversarial situation, but it also allows the parties to work through some of these issues on a voluntary basis versus having a court make that decision for you where you're stuck with the court's decision. Another thing we've learned post-COVID is we need to strengthen our language inside our contracts. For those of us who were able to predict well, then that litigation and or the process that we've gone through as we have dealt with these issues during COVID has been really clean and clear. But for all of us going forward, I think our minds have been in tune with recognizing that there are many acts of God that can occur, and how can we best address that in the terminology of our contracts. So we don't want to have any ambiguities in any term. Another thing that I've seen with some of our cases that have arisen during COVID is that it is important to pay attention to inconsistencies within our own contracts. And sometimes we forget, as we're building large multi-page contracts, we forget what we've said in page 1 or 2 when we get to the boilerplate language in maybe pages 50. And so it's important to stay consistent within our contracts so that there's no ambiguities and no inconsistencies between the language and how we have to deal with those kinds of issues. Now I'm going to turn to insurance, because that's really one of the most important places that many of our businesses have had to turn. And that's related to, what did our insurance contracts say? We're still thinking about contracts. But let me just remind us what we use insurance for, and that is the way we are able to allocate our risk between parties. We're able to transfer our risk to these insurance companies that have developed over the many years that they have been operating. We have various types of insurance that applies in our industry. Some of those might be those physical damage policies that have standardized terms. Those are the terms you can't negotiate, and you're stuck with what the insurance policy says and what the insurance company wants to say as it relates to that contract. We also have found that there are additional contracts, insurance contracts, that have more open-ended terms. And so we have spent a lot of focus and a lot of time looking at those individualized policies. Some of those might be event cancellation policies, production insurance, and also business interruption. So as it relates to any insurance policy, just as we just mentioned into our regular types of contracts, you've got to look at the language. You've got to look at what the parties either took from the insurance company or what they were able to negotiate with those insurance companies. We can look at litigation across America in order to see really where our courts have landed. So it still is in line with what we've seen, that courts are going to look at the language of the contract, as we saw earlier. But we've seen some specific trends as it relates to contract cases, COVID cases. In the federal court system, as it relates to these insurance claims, we see that pro-insurance decisions have been made as of March, really more so for the insurance company than for the insured. So as of March, we had about 1,300 lawsuits that had been filed against insurance companies related to pandemic issues, and that is in the federal court system. 44% of those have been dismissed by the courts to date. 16 or 17% have been dismissed by the plaintiffs by voluntary dismissal, and 40% have yet to be determined. So we've got some that still have to go through that process. What we see on the state system is that our court systems tend to be a little bit more diverse, and we're getting split decisions. And so we have seen many times where the insureds are seeking to go into the state court in order to get a little bit more action or more favorable responses from the court system. So post-COVID, what are we looking at as it relates to insurance policy? First, event cancellation policies are really under scrutiny. What we are seeing is there's going to be, and will continue to be post-COVID, much stricter underwriting requirements. We've seen over the last 12 months, 18 months, and going forward, premiums have increased extensively, costing quite a bit. It was costly before. Now it's even more costly. And it's likely that the insureds who are going to need to purchase these kinds of policies are going to have to shop around and get insurance policies from various insurers due to new capacity limits. And so that's something we've not always seen in the past. And so now there's going to be, could be some confusion as it relates to combining of our policies and figuring out who we're going to go with and as it relates to that capacity limitation. We also are seeing some new changes as it relates to that communicable disease coverage. At the present, it's almost non-existent. Prior to COVID, we had some 25% or so of the policies were able to get these kinds of coverage. Now we're seeing there's still a little bit left, but really that kind of coverage is almost non-existent due to the loss that our insurance companies have seen. So again, it lands really where it was before, but much risk is going to fall on those who produce and promote the live event in particular. And so risk is really what we're talking about, both with our contract terms as well as the insurance. And that now I'm going to turn it over to Mary Lauren to pick up the third topic, which is live streaming.
Live streaming became a critical issue during quarantine after COVID, and it continues to be a major issue and a source of income for artists in the entertainment space. Before I dive into what's currently happening with live streaming, I'd like to just kind of take a minute to remind us all that 2020 was a huge loss. It was a huge loss in the touring revenue space for artists. So 2020 was projected to produce the first $12 billion year in touring revenue worldwide. And in actuality, we came out at $1.2 billion. That resulted in a 90% loss. So the loss was very substantial. Live streaming is something that's been around for a long time, but it became a necessity during quarantine. So artists initially were not excited about live streaming, but during quarantine, they learned to adapt and learned to make live streaming become part of their everyday lives. And it's actually become its own standalone sector and category of what artists offer their fans. And the format certainly evolved a lot during COVID. At the beginning, there were very grainy, poor quality footage that artists used when engaging with their fans. And they've really learned how to take live streaming on. And the footage now is very high quality, and artists are able to use that as a very key part of their interaction with fans. A number of companies in business also turned to live streaming as a way to stay relevant during 2020, but they've continued to use live streaming as a very important tool and as a key part of their business going forward. The first example is the Grand Ole Opry. So the Grand Ole Opry was named as a top streamer by Pollstar and continues to live stream its concerts and continue using live streaming as a means to increase its reach and its engagement. Twitch recently announced that it launched a live streaming incubator program called The Collective to help train and support musicians that use their platform. So that's something that's brand new, that's been rolled out, and it's a way to increase fan engagement on Twitch and educate Twitch users on how they can use live streaming as a very viable way to engage with fans. Nugs.net has been around for a while, but during quarantine, they started Metallica Mondays, which consisted of weekly archival concerts that were streamed by Metallica. That was very successful. Stage It was very early on in the live streaming space. They started in 2012 and were recognized around that time by Billboard as one of the top music startups, but they grew substantially in 2020, 2021, and they also remain a very viable source for live streaming. Twitter, just last month, partnered exclusively with Billboard for the 2022 Women in Music Awards. So that was exciting. And of course, we've got YouTube Music, LiveX Live. Those have been around for a while, but Mandolin and New Chorus are newcomers in the live streaming space as well. So we've continued to see companies go into the live streaming space. We've even seen some companies consolidate recently in the live streaming space. So we'll continue to see more of that as time passes. One important thing about live streaming that's very something that's awesome for artists is that it allows more people to attend shows. So the accessibility component's very important. There are geographical constraints that might not allow a person to attend an in-concert or an in-person concert. There are also just capacity constraints. If the venue will only hold a certain amount of people. With live streaming, those things are not a problem. So there's definitely an accessibility component for more people than in-person audiences would have. Examples of that: at the end of last year, we saw Adele do her one night only show that was live streamed from Los Angeles on Hulu, YouTube TV, and a couple other platforms. There were over 10 million viewers. Had that only been an in-person event, we'd be looking at a couple hundred people. But because of the live stream component of that show, we saw over 10 million people tune in for that performance, which was extraordinary. Kanye West is another example of an artist that's really done a good job of tapping into live streaming. He had a studio performance a couple months ago that was streamed on Amazon Prime Video, Amazon Music app, and also the Amazon Twitch channel. It was exclusive for Amazon platforms. And while there were some hiccups with that performance that Kanye was a little bit vocal about, it was another way that he was able to engage with fans that he wouldn't have been able to do and wouldn't have had that substantial reach had it not been for live streaming. Something else we want to talk about today are the new social media platforms that have popped up during COVID and continue to be very relevant today. So social media usage and patterns increased and also changed a lot during COVID. The time for optimal posting changed during COVID. The time for engagement and reaching fans also changed during COVID. So the change in the type of content being shared also resulted in new platforms. And we quickly saw new platforms pop up and increase fan engagement and increase consumer usage. And we also saw the demographics of users of these platforms also change. So from maybe just millennials and Gen Z to being baby boomers. We saw a lot of changes in the social media landscape. So certain platforms definitely rose in popularity since 2020. And I think that they all serve separate, distinct purposes that make each platform special in its own way. We all know what Zoom is. We're all worn out and tired of Zoom, probably, but Zoom was a big one. Definitely very critical during COVID and still remains critical today. Facebook Rooms is another, YouTube Shorts, Google Hangouts, WhatsApp, Clubhouse, which has been kind of dying I don't want to say slow, painful death, but it's been dying a death over the last couple months. Unfortunately, Clubhouse was one that I was really excited about at the beginning of the pandemic and used it as a tool to interact with people in the music business and hear experts in the industry talk about, trends that they're seeing and things that they're excited about and projections and what's on the horizon. And unfortunately, Clubhouse, for a number of reasons, its users have sort of lost interest over the last several months. So TikTok, on the opposite end of that, though, has definitely not lost interest. It quickly rose in popularity and is a very heavy contender today in the social media space. So TikTok arrived in the US in 2018 and blew up during quarantine. Just became used by a lot of different age groups, a lot of different types of people, including artists. So it's become an essential promotional tool for artists and for labels. Labels have signed a lot of artists based on engagement on TikTok and videos that have gone viral on TikTok. It'll be interesting to see exactly how that translates into selling tickets and fans at shows, and time will tell how that's going to work out. But there have certainly been a lot of signings based on TikTok engagement alone. Songs that trend on TikTok often chart in the Billboard 100. We've seen a lot of that happen. Recently, I saw statistics, 67% of TikTok users are more likely to seek out songs on DSPs after hearing them on TikTok. So it's a very helpful tool for music and music discovery. And it drives other platforms like Spotify and Apple Music. It drives those numbers and those streams as well. Song promotion deals between music marketers like artists and labels and influencers have also increased. We've seen a lot of individuals in the music space realize that TikTok is a very viable place for music promotion. So we've seen those promotional deals be done between music marketers and influencers. Catalog music usage and discovery of new music has also been very important as a result of TikTok. Fleetwood Mac's Dreams re-entered the Billboard Hot 100 after a 43-year absence. And that's not the only one. We've seen a lot of catalog songs that really haven't had much popularity in recent years have a total resurgence as a result of being used in the short form videos that are found on TikTok's platform.
And in closing, we want to just reiterate what we all know, that COVID-19 has impacted all areas of the entertainment and music business. What we have seen again and again is that no one size fits all response will fix things. And so we have faced these challenges. We've faced them in different directions. And what has always been the case as it relates to the music and entertainment industry, and that is, it is the collaboration, the imagination, the inspiration, and the relationships, as well as the interconnectivity between each and every one of us in the entertainment world that has made this work and has made us be able to respond in as positive of a way as possible. And so I think what we've all learned is that we all have the capability. It's just, again, relying on those relationships that we have with one another and that imagination that many of us have in order to be able to succeed as we face a very unplanned future in the music and entertainment industry. We hope you've enjoyed our presentation. Thank you so much.